The great chamber of the Galactic Council was built from shining crystal and silver metal. Its walls caught the light of the nearby star and made soft colors dance across the room. Delegates from hundreds of worlds sat in curved rows that surrounded a long table in the center. They spoke in many voices and many tones as they argued about trade, borders, and laws. At the end of the table sat the humans. They were quiet. They were always quiet these days. The leader of the human delegation, Laura Grant, sat with her hands folded in front of her and her face calm. Her dark eyes watched every movement in the room but gave away nothing. Around her sat 5 others, 2 men and 3 women, each from different colonies across the human worlds. They listened as the alien voices rose in anger and pride, but they said nothing. It had not always been this way. There was a time when humans had spoken often at this table. They had been full of ideas and energy. Their engineers had helped build the great bridges between planets. Their soldiers had stood beside alien troops against the pirate fleets, and their scientists had shared medicines that saved whole species from dying out. Humans had come from a small blue world far from the galactic center, and for centuries they had earned the respect of all. But respect was a fragile thing in a galaxy of pride. Slowly, small insults had grown. Some council members began to say that humans were too emotional, too unpredictable. Others claimed humans sought to control trade through their technology. Each meeting grew colder than the last. Now the chamber was filled with noise again as a tall alien from the Cathari Empire spoke in a deep, metallic tone. He waved his forearms and declared that the humans should share the new energy drive they had developed. It was unfair, he said, that humans kept it to themselves. Another delegate from the Varn Republic agreed and added that humans had become selfish. Laura Grant listened but did not move. When the calls for a vote came, the council chair turned toward the human table. Everyone waited for her to speak, but she did not. She simply stood, nodded to her team, and turned toward the door. The humans rose together and walked out of the chamber. Their footsteps echoed against the glass floor. Not one word was spoken. The doors closed behind them, and the silence that followed was heavier than any argument. The other delegates sat frozen. For a moment, no one knew what to do. Then the Cathari representative laughed and said that humans were only showing their usual arrogance. The laughter was forced, and no one joined him. Even the chair looked uneasy. Messages were sent to the human embassy that evening, but there was no reply. The next day, the human seat at the council table was empty. The banners of Earth and the colonies were taken down quietly by the staff. Some thought the humans were making a point and would return soon. Others began to worry. In the days that followed, strange reports came in from across the galaxy. Human ships were seen leaving alien ports and heading toward unknown coordinates. Factories on shared worlds shut down, and workers packed their tools. The great trade stations that had been built by human engineers began to power down. The communication networks once managed by human systems went offline one after another. It happened so smoothly that no one could tell when it had begun. The council tried to send envoys, but no human would meet them. The few aliens who still had human friends said the same thing. Their calls went unanswered. Messages came back marked as delivered but unread. A week later, a young aide in the council's communication office received a final transmission from the main human relay on New Horizon Station. The message was short. It said only that all human activity under council authority was ending, and that humanity wished peace to all races. The aide brought it to the chair in silence. The message was read aloud before the full assembly. It was not long, but when it ended, the chamber was filled with whispers. Some demanded punishment. Others asked for talks, but no one knew where to send them. The humans were gone. On the outer worlds, the effects were immediate. The Kalthari mining fleets found their machines frozen without human engineers to fix them. The Oran medical centers lost access to human-designed nanotech, and patients began to die. The Thar Dominion discovered that its new defense grid, built on human code, could not be updated without access keys that had vanished. At first, the council refused to believe it. They assumed that the humans would come back when the council offered apologies or trade deals. But weeks turned into months, and there was still no answer. The humans had left without saying a word. Back on Etherian Prime, Laura Grant stood on the balcony of the human embassy. It was late evening, and the twin suns were setting behind the silver towers. She looked down at the city below, where lights flickered like stars. Behind her, her second-in-command, a man named Ethan Brooks, stepped forward. He looked tired but calm. He asked if the council would understand what was coming. Laura shook her head. She said they never listened when it mattered, and now they would learn in silence. She pressed a button on her wrist console, and the holographic seal of the embassy faded into darkness. The building lights went out one floor at a time. Across the planet, every human structure followed. From orbit, the pattern of blackouts looked like a wave spreading across the continent. Within an hour, all human activity on Etherian Prime had stopped. The ships in orbit fired their engines and vanished into hyperspace. The council could only watch as the last of them disappeared from their sensors. In the following days, panic spread. Supply chains that had run for decades broke apart. Starships that depended on human-made parts were grounded. Even the council's security systems began to fail, for many of their programs had been written by human minds long gone. The chair called for an emergency summit. Alien diplomats filled the chamber again, but the air was heavy and tense. Some shouted that the humans had betrayed the council. Others said it was their own fault for pushing them away. For hours they argued, but there was no answer. The humans had taken with them not just their technology, but also their trust. The alliances that once held the galaxy together were beginning to crumble. Out in deep space, far beyond the council's reach, a fleet of human ships gathered near a quiet red star. On the flagship Aurora, Laura Grant watched as the last jump coordinates were confirmed. Around her, officers moved in silence. No one spoke of the council or the old alliances. There was only the steady hum of engines and the soft glow of navigation lights. Humanity was leaving, not in anger but in decision. They had built much, helped much, and been ignored once too often. They would build again, somewhere beyond the edge of the map, where no council could reach them. Laura closed her eyes and thought of Earth, the birthplace that had once looked up to the stars with hope. Now humanity would do so again, but on its own terms. When the Aurora and its fleet vanished into hyperspace, the space they left behind was empty and quiet. Back in the galactic core, no one yet understood how deep the silence would go or how long it would last. But for the first time in centuries, the galaxy realized what it meant to lose the humans who had always stood beside them. And though no one could say it aloud, the regret had already begun. The days after humanity's departure were filled with confusion and disbelief across the stars. On many worlds, people refused to believe that humans had truly gone. The great trading ports where human ships once docked stood empty, their loading arms hanging still. The corridors of the stations echoed with the sound of footsteps that no longer came. Merchants stared at the sky, waiting for the familiar shape of human cargo ships, but nothing appeared. It was as if an entire people had vanished overnight, taking with them not only their presence but the heart of galactic trade and trust. In the council halls, debates went on endlessly. Some said the humans had planned this for years. Others said it was only a bluff and that they would return when the galaxy begged for them. But every attempt to reach them failed. No messages came back, no signals were answered, and the silence grew heavier each passing day. In the city of Etherian Prime, the once bright human district was now deserted. Stores were empty, workshops locked, and even the soft hum of human power systems had gone silent. Alien engineers tried to restart the systems, but they could not. The machines were built with codes and methods that only humans knew. As the days turned into weeks, the effects began to spread. The transport network slowed down as human navigation software went offline. Medical stations lost access to human-made vaccines and nanotech programs. On the border planets, defense grids began to fail because the engineers who maintained them were gone. The galaxy had depended more on human systems than anyone had ever realized, and now every part of it was showing the cracks. On the council floor, the delegates argued with growing fear in their voices. The Cathari Empire demanded that the council seize all remaining human assets. The Oran Confederacy pleaded for peace and understanding. The Thar Dominion accused everyone else of driving humanity away. Each speech grew louder and more bitter until the chair finally called for order. But there was little order left to be found. The council had lost more than just one member race. They had lost the balance that humans had quietly kept between the great powers. The humans had been the ones who bridged differences, who calmed tempers, and who kept wars from starting. Now those old rivalries were returning, stronger than ever. Far from the council's eyes, the outer colonies began to feel the loss more sharply. On the planet Vorthus, a cold mining world where human and alien workers had lived together for decades, the withdrawal hit like a storm. The human miners had packed their equipment and boarded their ships without warning. The alien workers woke to find the tunnels empty and the lights dark. A few stayed behind hoping the humans would return, but weeks later, the power generators failed and the mines froze. In orbit, the once busy station began to decay. The story was the same on world after world. Trade collapsed, factories shut down, and entire planets fell into chaos. Without human engineers and logistics, the great machine of galactic civilization began to slow. Meanwhile, among the humans themselves, there was no celebration and no anger. They moved quietly, rebuilding in the deep parts of space where no alien had ever traveled. Fleets of colony ships gathered around new suns, carrying millions of people, machines, and seeds of new worlds. They built cities in silence, guided by a single belief that had taken root among them all. They would no longer serve a galaxy that saw them as lesser. They would build something better, something their children could call truly their own. On the ship Horizon, Captain Marie Lewis watched her crew as they worked on the ship's outer hull. She remembered her years in the Council fleet and the pride she once felt wearing the uniform. Now she felt only a quiet certainty. Humanity's age of serving others was over. Back in Council space, fear turned to regret. The Council chair, an old Oran named Valen, walked through the empty hall where the human banners once hung. He had known many human leaders and respected them deeply. He remembered Laura Grant, the calm and thoughtful ambassador who always tried to find peace even when others refused to listen. He had not believed she would ever walk away from the Council, but now her silence echoed louder than any speech. Velen ordered a search mission to locate the human fleets, though many argued it was useless. Still, a dozen ships were sent into deep space following the faint trails of hyperspace drives. None returned. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to fracture. Without human technology to manage communication, the flow of information between systems slowed to a crawl. Trade routes once watched by human patrols became dangerous again. Pirates returned to the lanes and border conflicts flared up. The Kelthari and Thar began fighting over disputed mining zones, while the Varn Republic withdrew from the Council altogether. On many planets, ordinary citizens began to whisper about the humans. Some called them cowards who abandoned the galaxy in its time of need. Others said they were wise, that they had seen what was coming and saved themselves. Every story grew as it was told, but no one truly knew where humanity had gone. One evening, a signal reached Etherian Prime. It was weak and distorted, coming from beyond the edge of known space. The message was short and contained no words, only a simple image. It showed the blue and white spiral of a distant galaxy. Then it ended. The Council scientists studied it for days, searching for meaning. Some thought it was a coordinate, a sign of where humanity had gone. Others believed it was a message of farewell. Whatever it was, it brought no comfort. For the first time in generations, the galaxy felt small and cold. In the years that followed, younger species grew up hearing stories of the humans who left. To them, humans became a legend, a race that had given the galaxy its light and then taken it away when it was not valued. On worlds that had once been allied with Earth, statues were built in silent respect. On others, where envy and pride still ruled, the mention of humanity was forbidden. But whether loved or hated, no one could forget them. Every broken machine, every failed system, every quiet moment in the empty docks reminded the galaxy of what had been lost. Laura Grant watched the stars from her ship as it drifted beyond the old borders. Around her, the new human colonies shone faintly in the darkness, each one growing stronger each day. She thought of the Council, of the faces that had once filled the chamber with pride and noise. She knew they would regret what they had done. Humanity had not sought power or conquest. They had only wanted respect, and when it was denied, they had taken the one thing that could not be stolen: their dignity. The engines of her ship came to life, and the stars stretched before her like a path waiting to be walked. Humanity's journey was not over. It was only beginning. The galaxy had changed since the humans left. The great trade routes that once glowed with the light of countless ships were now quiet and thin. The great markets that once sold goods from 1,000 worlds were now half empty. The Council kept meeting in the same shining chamber, but the voices that filled it were tired. Each race spoke only of its own problems now. The spirit of unity that humans had once helped build was gone. Without them, things felt smaller and colder. The old rivalries that humans had helped to calm were returning one by one. The Cathari Empire refused to share energy supplies. The Auran Confederacy closed its borders. The Thar Dominion began building new war fleets. Every world began to look inward. No one wanted to admit it, but everyone missed the humans. The chair of the council, Valen, sat alone in his office one evening. He watched the reports come in. Food shortages on distant colonies, power failures in the outer sectors, pirate attacks near the old trade lanes. The galaxy was slowly breaking apart. He thought of the last time he had spoken to Laura Grant. She had been calm and kind, but there had been something final in her eyes. He realized now that she had already made her choice then. He wondered if she had known how much the galaxy would suffer without her people. Perhaps she had, and that was why she had left quietly. He turned off the screen and looked out through the window. The stars shone like distant eyes watching him. For the first time in his long life, Valine felt truly alone. In the outer sectors, the effects of the human departure were even more painful. On the mining world of Laura 4, the machines that once ran with human-made software stopped working. The local workers tried to fix them, but they did not have the skill or knowledge. The planet's economy collapsed, and thousands fled into space. On another world, medical stations lost their human-built life support systems, and whole hospitals shut down. Even the great defense systems around major planets began to fail. The humans had been the glue that held everything together, and now the cracks were spreading faster than anyone could stop them. Still, some refused to believe they were gone forever. Rumors began to spread of human ships seen at the edge of known space, of colonies built on distant stars. No one could prove it, but the stories kept growing. Among those who still believed in peace was a young Kalthari scientist named Ren. She had worked with human engineers before and respected their way of thinking. She remembered how patient they were when others mocked them, how they helped without asking for praise. She could not believe they had left out of pride. She thought there had to be another reason. One night she stood on the balcony of her lab and looked at the stars. She promised herself she would find them. She began to study the faint traces left in hyperspace after the human fleets had jumped away. It was difficult work. The trails were weak, almost erased by time, but she followed them carefully, bit by bit. The more she studied, the more she began to understand the path they had taken. It led far beyond the border of known space, into the dark regions where no star charts reached. Months passed. The council grew weaker and the galaxy more divided. Valine tried to bring the leaders together again, but no one listened. Each world blamed another for the loss of the humans. Trade deals turned into threats. Skirmishes broke out in the border zones. The council halls that once shone with light now stood half empty. The statues of great diplomats gathered dust. Velen walked past them in silence each morning, remembering the days when laughter and reason filled those halls. He thought again of Laura Grant's last words before she had walked away. He remembered her saying that respect could not be forced. He had not understood it then. He understood it now. Far away, in a region beyond all maps, the humans were building new worlds. They had chosen a cluster of stars rich in resources and hidden from easy detection. The new colonies grew quickly. Cities rose from the dust, powered by clean energy and guided by careful planning. There were no grand speeches or military parades. There was only quiet work and purpose. Humanity had learned its lesson from the old galaxy. They would not seek praise or control this time. They would build something lasting and fair, away from the noise of politics. Children grew up without fear, knowing only the open sky and the hum of ships above. To them, the council was a story of the past, something their parents spoke of with distant sadness. Laura Grant lived in one of the first cities on a world they called Haven. She spent her days helping plan new settlements and her nights watching the twin moons rise. Sometimes she thought of Velen and the others. She wondered if they had begun to understand. She did not hate them. She only wished they had listened when it mattered. When she looked at the stars, she felt both peace and sorrow. Peace because humanity was free at last. Sorrow because they had once believed the galaxy could be united. Now she knew that unity built without respect was only a fragile shell. When the storms came, it had to break. Back in the old galaxy, Ren's search continued. Her work had drawn attention. Some called her foolish, others desperate. But she kept going. One day she found something that changed everything. A small probe drifted through the void, covered in dust and faint light. It bore the human mark. When she brought it aboard her ship, she found a message stored inside. It was simple and short. It contained a map of several star systems beyond the known borders, and a single line of text. It said in the calm voice of Laura Grant that humanity had gone where it could build without judgment, and that it wished peace to all who remembered respect. Wren sat in silence for a long time after the message ended. She felt both joy and sadness. She had found them, but she also knew they would not return. Wren took the message back to the council. When it was played in the great chamber, the old delegates sat in silence. The words echoed off the crystal walls like a soft wind. No one spoke. No one argued. Even Velen lowered his head. There were no excuses left to give. The council voted that day to send an official message to humanity, asking for forgiveness. But no answer came. The humans had moved too far, and their communication systems no longer reached. Still, for the first time since they had left, there was no shouting in the chamber, only quiet reflection. As years passed, the council began to change. Inspired by Wren's discovery, some worlds started to rebuild trust. They formed small alliances based on fairness and cooperation, trying to honor what the humans had once stood for. But it was not easy. Old wounds took time to heal. Many still fought and many still blamed. Yet slowly the lessons of the humans began to take root. They realized that strength did not come from power, but from understanding. Velen spent his final years teaching new diplomats what he had learned too late. He told them that silence can be louder than words, and respect is more valuable than any trade deal. When he died, they buried him beneath the council hall. On his tomb, they carved a single line that said, "We remember the ones who left without saying a word." Out in the quiet reaches of space, beyond the rim, the new human worlds continued to grow. Ships moved between them, carrying goods, ideas, and hope. The people worked together, stronger and wiser than before. They still remembered the old galaxy, but it was no longer their burden. They had learned what it meant to walk away and to begin again. The stars above Haven burned bright and calm, and for the first time in many generations, humanity felt truly home. The message that Wren had brought back to the council spread across the galaxy like a quiet wind. It reached every world and every race that had once called the humans allies. Many watched the short recording again and again. Some cried, some grew silent, and others turned away, unable to face their own guilt. For the first time since humanity had left, the galaxy was united in one emotion: regret. It hung in the air like a heavy fog that no one could clear. Old enemies paused their wars for a moment to listen to the words of Laura Grant. Her voice was calm, carrying no anger, no demand for revenge, only truth. She said that humanity had asked for respect, not power, and when it was denied, they chose to walk away. The message ended with a soft wish for peace. There were no threats, no warnings, no promises of return. It was the quiet farewell of a people who had given up trying to be heard. In the weeks after the message was shown, the council halls filled again, but the tone had changed. The loud speeches and angry debates were gone. Now there was only reflection. Delegates spoke in low voices about the things they had ignored. The Kethari representative stood before the chamber and admitted that his empire had treated humans as tools. The Oran delegate confessed that his world had mocked their ideas. Even the Thar, who once saw themselves as the rulers of all, bowed their heads. They knew the truth now. Humanity had been the one race that believed in the good of others, and they had all failed to see it. Velen was gone, but his words lived on through his writings. He had told them that silence is not weakness, that sometimes the absence of a voice can speak louder than 1,000 words. Now they understood what he meant. Across the galaxy, the search for humans continued, though fewer believed they would be found. The probes that were sent into the deep void returned with only faint readings and broken signals. The stars beyond the mapped regions seemed endless, and humanity had vanished into them completely. On some worlds, people built monuments to the memory of their old friends. On others, small groups began to study human teachings, using their writings and science to guide new generations. The Kalthari opened their academies to all species, inspired by the human way of learning through cooperation. The Auran started peace missions to worlds they had once ignored. Slowly, the galaxy began to heal. It was fragile and slow, but it was real. Yet not everyone accepted the change. There were still those who saw humanity's silence as an insult. In the darker corners of space, powerful leaders began to whisper about finding them, not to make peace, but to claim what they believed was owed. A Thar warlord named Kor led a secret fleet to follow the coordinates that had been found in the human message. His plan was to reach their new colonies and demand their return to the council. He said that the galaxy could not survive without them. But deep down, everyone knew that his pride could not bear the thought of a galaxy that no longer needed him. His ships moved through the void for months, chasing shadows across dead systems. When they finally reached the edge of the new human space, they saw something that made them stop. Ahead of them, floating in the black, was a structure larger than any they had seen before. It was not a station or a ship. It was a living city built among the stars. It shone with soft blue light and moved gracefully like it was part of the universe itself. Human ships surrounded it, sleek and silent. When Kor's fleet tried to send a signal, the reply came at once. It was not a warning or a threat. It was a single line of text. It said that humanity wished no harm, but would defend its home if needed. Kor hesitated. He could feel the weight of those words. There was no arrogance in them, only strength. He ordered his ships to withdraw. The message had been clear. The humans had no wish for war, but they were no longer the same as before. They had grown beyond the reach of the old galaxy. News of Kor's encounter reached the council soon after. For the first time in many years, there was hope mixed with their regret. They realized that humanity still watched them, still remembered even if from far away. The chair at that time, a young Oran named Selra, spoke to the assembly. She said that if the humans could find peace and rebuild among the stars, then so could they. Under her guidance, the council began to change. They opened borders again. They shared technology instead of hoarding it. They created a new code of respect between species. Every decision was made with one rule in mind. Never again should pride destroy unity. The humans had shown them that lesson in silence, and it had taken them years to understand. Meanwhile, in the hidden colonies, life continued to grow. The human cities sparkled across the worlds they had chosen. Vast gardens replaced the old factories, and clean rivers flowed through their streets. The people lived with purpose. They built machines that healed the land instead of burning it. They taught their children about the stars and about what had been lost in the old galaxy. They did not speak of revenge. They spoke of learning, of building a future that would never repeat the mistakes of the past. Laura Grant still lived, though older now, her hair turned silver. She walked among the people with quiet pride. When asked if she ever missed the old council, she would smile sadly and say that she hoped they had learned something from the silence. On one quiet night, she stood outside her home and looked up at the sky. The stars above Haven glowed like silver dust scattered across black velvet. Somewhere out there she knew the council was watching. She wondered what they thought when they saw that light. She hoped they saw not anger but understanding. Behind her, the hum of the city carried softly through the air. It was peaceful and alive. For a long moment she closed her eyes and listened. It was the sound of a people who had found their place at last. Years later, a small probe arrived at the edge of human space. It carried no weapons and no threats, only a message. It came from the council. The message said that they had changed, that they had begun to rebuild what was broken. It said they had learned the meaning of respect and asked only for the chance to speak again. When the message reached the human leaders, there was much discussion. Some argued that the past should remain buried. Others believed forgiveness was part of moving forward. In the end, Laura Grant made the decision herself. She sent a reply, short and calm. It said that humanity was glad the galaxy had found peace and that true understanding required time. There was no promise to return, but there was no rejection either. The message ended with the words, "We remember and we wish you well." When the council received the reply, many cried openly. The words were few, but they carried the weight of generations. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was hope. The chair ordered that the message be preserved in the council archives forever. Across the galaxy, people gathered to listen to it. For a moment, the stars felt closer again. The silence that had once been heavy now felt like peace. The galaxy finally began to move forward, guided by the lesson that had taken them so long to understand. The humans had not needed to shout or fight or threaten. They had only needed to walk away, and by doing so, they had taught the greatest lesson of all. That respect, once lost, must be earned through humility and time, and that sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that change everything. The years passed like quiet waves over the stars, and the galaxy continued to heal from the emptiness humanity had left behind. The council was no longer the same as it had been in the old days. The halls that once echoed with anger and pride were now filled with calm voices and reasoned words. The younger races had learned from the silence the humans left them. They built bridges of peace and shared knowledge that once would have been guarded. Trade began to flow again, not through greed but through trust. The old rivalry still existed, but they no longer ruled every decision. There was a sense of balance that had never been there before. And though no human ships had been seen for decades, their name was spoken with respect in every corner of the galaxy. Humanity had become a legend, a story told to children about the people who taught the stars the meaning of respect. On the world of Haven, the center of the new human colonies, life was simple and strong. The cities had grown into beautiful places of light and nature. Gardens covered rooftops and tall buildings shone like glass under the twin suns. The people lived without hurry. They worked, learned, and built together. They no longer thought of themselves as conquerors or as members of a council. They were only human, and that was enough. Children grew up hearing the stories of the old galaxy, of the time when their ancestors had been part of something larger. Some asked why they had left, and the elders would tell them that respect cannot be demanded, it must be shared. They were taught that walking away had not been a defeat but a choice to begin again. Humanity had not vanished. It had simply chosen to grow elsewhere. Laura Grant grew older in this new world. Her hair had turned white, and her steps were slower, but her eyes still carried the same quiet strength. She often sat by the river that ran through the heart of the city and watched the water flow under the bridges. People still came to her for advice, though she no longer held any title. They called her the Mother of Silence, a name she never asked for but quietly accepted. She told them that silence was not the absence of voice but the space where understanding begins. When she looked up at the night sky, she sometimes wondered how the old galaxy was doing. She hoped they had truly changed. She had seen how hard it was for the Council to admit its mistakes, but she had also seen the beginning of something new in their last message, a spark of humility that had taken 1,000 years to appear. In the far reaches of the old galaxy, the Council had kept its promise. They worked together to rebuild what had been lost. A new generation of leaders rose, people who had been born after the humans had left. To them, humanity was a symbol of hope and balance. They studied human history and values, trying to understand how one species could have made such a difference. A new academy was built on Etherian Prime, dedicated to the study of human philosophy and cooperation. Its motto was simple: we remember and we learn. Every student who entered its doors swore to uphold the lesson the humans had left behind, to listen, to respect, and to never let pride blind them again. One day, a message arrived at Haven. It was faint, carried across endless light years, and encoded in an ancient signal format. The technicians almost missed it. When they decoded it, they saw the emblem of the Galactic Council. It was not a call for aid or trade. It was an invitation. The Council was holding a grand assembly to mark the centenary of humanity's departure. They wished for a human presence not as a demand, but as a gesture of remembrance. When the message reached Laura Grant, she was silent for a long time. The people waited for her decision. Some wanted to ignore it. Others felt it was time to see what the galaxy had become. Laura finally said that the silence had done its work, and now the time for listening had come. She agreed to send a small ship to attend, not as a return to the Council, but as a visit between old friends. When the ship Aurora the Sound left Haven, many gathered to watch it rise into the pale sky. It was the same design as the old human vessel, simple and graceful. On board were scientists, diplomats, and young explorers who had only heard of the Council in stories. As the engines flared and the stars stretched before them, Laura watched from the riverbank. Her reflection in the water was calm. She knew this was not about politics or power. It was about connection, the kind that could only grow when both sides had learned to listen. She whispered a quiet wish for their journey and turned away, content that the future no longer needed her to guide it. Weeks later, the Aurora 2 reached the galactic core. The council chamber was bright again, though simpler than before. There were no gold banners or proud displays, only clear glass and light. When the human ship entered orbit, the entire assembly stood in silence. The doors opened and the human envoy stepped inside. They wore no uniforms, only plain gray suits. The crowd watched as the leader, a young man named Aaron Reed, walked to the center of the hall. His voice was calm when he spoke. He said that humanity was grateful for the invitation, that they had watched the galaxy grow from afar, and that they were glad to see peace taking root. He said that humanity did not come to lead or to judge, but to share friendship. The room remained silent for a long time after he finished. Then slowly every delegate rose and placed their hands over their hearts, the gesture of respect that had once been human. For the first time in centuries, the council was united not by law, but by gratitude. After the ceremony, Aaron met with the council members in private. They shared stories, exchanged memories, and spoke of new ideas. There were no demands, no negotiations, only learning. The humans offered small gifts, pieces of art, and knowledge. They did not stay long. When the Aurora II departed, it left behind a sense of peace that had been missing for generations. The council chair, Selra, watched the ship disappear into the stars and smiled. She knew they would not see them again soon, but that did not matter. What mattered was that they had spoken once more, not in words of power, but in understanding. Back on Haven, life went on. Laura heard of the success of the visit and smiled. She sat by the river and closed her eyes, feeling the warm light of the suns on her face. She had lived long enough to see silence become peace. Humanity had found its place, and the galaxy had found its conscience. As night came, she looked to the stars one last time and whispered a soft goodbye to the worlds that had once doubted them. She knew they would remember. The stars shimmered above like they were listening, and somewhere across the endless dark, the light of both galaxies shone together, a quiet promise that even in silence, understanding could grow. Humanity had left without saying a word, but their silence had spoken louder than any voice, and the galaxy would never forget it.